And joining me now here in the studio are analysts who've been with us for live coverage of this Senate trial all day. They are Martin Paoni. He was the Democratic Senate Secretary for 13 years, including during President Clinton's impeachment trial. Elizabeth Crisp, she was the Republican Senate Secretary during that Clinton trial. Victoria Norris was special counsel to the Senate Judiciary Committee in the early 90s. And John Hart, he worked for Congressman Tom Coburn, Republican of Oklahoma, also during the Clinton impeachment. Hello again to all of you. I want to pick up on something that we just heard, Marty Paoni, we just heard from former Congressman Barr, and that is that while he may disagree with the argument that the managers are making, he thinks they are being effective in the way they're framing the case. How do you see that?
I agree with him. I think so far what we've seen, they've done a very good job of weaving in their opinion of the founding, their recitation of the Federalist Papers, quoting Hamilton, Madison, Franklin, the founding fathers, and they weave that in with the evidence they had from the witnesses that they already got to testify and the recitation of the charges. And you know, I think he's on point there.
Elizabeth Crisp, what about that? I mean, how do you see the structure, the approach that the Democrats are taking?
They seem to be very methodical. It is a difficult role. They seem to be very methodical, and I agree with former Congressman Barr, where they are being successful in introducing new names or a little bit of new information. And that could spark somebody's interest, especially these senators that maybe haven't heard it or want to hear more. And that begs the question, could they possibly vote for evidence or witnesses down the road? I think that they keep weaving in sort of rehashing of Mueller. I think that might lose some of the members. They tended to do that sort of later in the day. So that didn't seem to be the smartest move as far as I was concerned.
We heard, and I didn't mean to interrupt you, but we heard Lisa Desjardins mentioning, I mean, as much as you can tell from somebody's face or demeanor,
right,
that didn't seem to be engendering a lot of interest.
She didn't say they were rolling eyes, but you sort of get the impression if they knew they weren't being looked at, they might do a little eye roll or something like that.
Yeah, it's, I mean, as somebody who knows the Constitution, teaches constitutional law, Victoria Norris, I mean, it is a challenging job that these managers have. They've been given 24 hours over the course of 3 days. And as we said, the senators are a captive audience. They've got to sit there and listen. Some of them are taking notes. Do you get the sense of a case that's being, an effective case being built?
I think I was very impressed with the seriousness and methodical nature of the argument. You know, we heard the Chief Justice admonishing folks late in the evening, but today we saw the demeanor was very much like in a trial where a trial lawyer would present a case. Mr. Schiff presented the overall case and then individual managers thereafter. As far as the law, we're going to see more legal arguments about the Constitution coming up quick because Mr. Barr suggested that you need a crime. Many of my colleagues in the Academy would say you don't need a crime and that a crime against an election would suffice. So more of that will be coming up.
That it's something unique that a president is able to do, and he should be judged on that basis rather than what's in the criminal code.
Right, because that's a low bar. You certainly don't want your president to violate the criminal law, and that there are crimes against the public trust and against democracy that should be the subject of impeachment.
I want to come back to John Hart, to this question. We were talking about this earlier today, but in terms of how the American people who are paying attention to that, I mean, it's the senators who the Democrats need to persuade, but in terms of people watching and to the extent anybody pays attention to public opinion, are these arguments that you think are capturing people's attention, imagination, or what? How do you?
Well, I think some of them that are happening off the Senate floor are. And so, Judy, we have to remember that we're starting from a point where they're 20 votes short of changing the outcome. So the early test votes, they need 67 votes. The votes yesterday, there were 11. 47 votes would support impeachment right now if you follow the logic of the previous votes. So what that says is the public has to be very animated and they have to have a major sea change to see the outcome change. Lindsey Graham did a very effective job, I think, articulating what the principle is on the Republican side, which is the consent of the governed is the foundational constitutional principle at stake here. is that the bar for impeachment of a high crime and misdemeanor has to be so high that it has to nullify the consent of the governed who elected Donald Trump president and who want him to be on the ballot coming up in just a few months now. And so I think it's a very, very steep mountain, and I don't think the public has been stirred sufficiently by what we've seen so far. I think the presentations have been effective, and I think the constitutional arguments are very, very important that they'll flesh out. But I don't see a game changer yet.
Yeah, the public opinion polls show a division of the American people. It's gone up and down a little bit. Marty Paoni, as you listen to this, is there something in the Democratic argument that you're familiar with that you believe they should be stressing more or less? I mean, how do you, when you've got this much time and you've got the captive audience we talked about, what more can to build the case that they need to build?
I think it'll be interesting to see if somebody touches on the timing of when the whistleblower report or the whistleblower information was conveyed to the White House and how that lined up with when they finally did release the aid. And, was it being released because, okay, it was time to release it, or was it being released because you knew that this information was going to come out? And I haven't heard any of the Democratic House managers tie that up, but it's early. This is only the first day.
You heard some reference today of that from Adam Schiff, but you're right. I mean, I think they're going to go into more detail about the exact timeline. Elizabeth Christ, what about that? I mean, in terms of what else the managers need to do here?
I think maybe introduce new players a little bit, like Mr. Parniff. That would be new to probably the average.
This is the Giuliani associate.
Correct.
Right.
The average TV watcher would wonder who that gentleman is and wonder how he plays into it and that kind of thing. That might be something we see in the next. Of course, we've got 2 more days of this, so that might be something we see in the next couple of days.
We have the hours tonight. They're supposed to go up to 8 hours tonight. And in fact, Victoria Norris, I mean, they don't have to go the full 24 hours. They are given up to 24 hours spread out over 3 days. They may decide it works against them to be going on and on and on.
I agree. We've already had a trial before the trial in all of the objections and the motions to go after other evidence. We had the preview of the trial, and now we're having a repetition of the trial. So at some point, they're going to get very tired of hearing the same things over and over again, and they may decide it's not worth it to do that. There is always a point at which senators really are starting, as your correspondent said, they're starting to mill out, and they're getting tired. And there's always a point in an impeachment. Andrew Johnson, they got tired of the trial there too, that they will get tired and want things to come to a close. And then going over and over again your case can actually annoy people.
Yeah. And just finally, John Hart, we are covering this trial, in minute detail, but we're also hearing from the senators on the outside. We're hearing from the president, who is slamming, everything about the trial because he thinks it's the wrong thing to do. Are we, how do we? I basically want to ask you, how does the media make sure that we get it right as we cover this?
Well, I think humility. I think humility on all sides. I think asking the other side what they really think. What is at stake here? And I think it's important. Again, going back to what Lindsey Graham said, is that what's at stake is do the American people have the right to elect the president? And in order to overcome that bar, you've got to prove something very, very heinous. It has to be a high crime and misdemeanor, something very serious, and not just a bad motive with this call with the Ukrainian. And the reality is, Republicans would not say this call was perfect. If you did a private poll, but they would not say it's impeachable. I mean, there is not nearly the support needed to do that.
But of course, Democrats feel very strongly in the other direction. They're saying to ask a foreign leader to provide assistance in getting a president reelected is a pretty egregious. That's the case. That's the nub of the case. All right, it's only day 2, and we've got more to go. We're going to be together again this evening for several hours of live coverage and analysis. And you can join our ongoing coverage of the Senate trial for the remainder of the evening. Check your local listings for that and online on our website or on YouTube. And again, tomorrow, Thursday, when the trial resumes at 1 o'clock Eastern p.m.